Pope Julius III came into power after the death of Paul III. He ruled the Papal States from February of 1550 up until his death 5 years later in 1555. As Pope, Julius III did almost nothing he was supposed to do. His papacy was filled with scandal, but the worst involved his adopted nephew. Innocenzo Ciocchi del Monte was a beggar discovered on the street of Parma. He was hired by the Pope's family to be a lowly hall boy or a domestic worker. The boy was around 14 years old, and he was immediately given the title Cardinal Nephew when Julius became the Pope. However, it's likely he wasn't promoted based on his merits. Rumors began to circle that the Pope was having an extremely inappropriate relationship with the young boy. He was treated like the Pope's pet, and this reflected very poorly on the Church. We still don't know what the exact nature of their relationship was, but it was bad enough that after Pope Julius died, the boy was banished. Pope Urban II is most famous for ordering the very first crusade and plunging the Middle Ages into years of conflict and bloodshed. He incited violence by calling all Christians in Europe to fight against the Muslims and reclaim the Holy Land. It was Pope Urban II who cried, "God wills it." The Holy Land encompasses the entirety of the Middle East. It's the birthplace of Christianity and Judaism, centered in the city of Jerusalem. Since the 6th century, the Holy Land had been firmly controlled by Muslims. Then, in the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks abruptly decided Christians would no longer be allowed inside Jerusalem. Christians were banished, and the Turks also made threats against the Byzantine Empire, saying they would take the city of Constantinople. Emperor Alexius I appealed to Pope Urban II for help, and thus began the Crusades. The Pope used his power to unite Europe under a Christian banner. About 100,000 soldiers took up the call, and this was only the first of 7 major military campaigns that would take place over the next 200 years. Pope Boniface VIII is known by some as the Devil Pope for his supposed worship of Satan. When Pope Boniface was elected, he was living as a hermit in a mountain cave. The College of Cardinals had to travel thousands of feet up the mountains just to tell him he was going to be Pope. The details surrounding his election are so dramatic they could be made into a mini-series. The previous Pope, Celestine V, was wildly unpopular, but still had a lot of powerful friends in powerful places. He renounced the papacy because the people hated him so much, but he still had influence. Pope Boniface knew this, so he imprisoned him as his first act and kept him locked in a castle until he died. He formalized the Jubilees and founded the University of Rome La Sapienza, but then his hunger for power grew. He wound up becoming a great enemy of King Philip IV of France and exiled him from the church in 1303. King Philip was notoriously cruel and allegedly spread rumors that Pope Boniface was a devil worshipper. After the Pope died shortly after exiling Philip under mysterious circumstances, the king staged a trial in which the dead Pope was charged with heresy. Pope Damasus I was one of the first popes in history, ruling the Church in the Western Roman Empire, likely from between 304 to 384 AD. However, historians aren't completely sure on all the dates. Damasus served as pope during some of the first years that Christianity was gaining power. At this time, pagans were still running wild, and the Roman Empire had yet to collapse in on itself. In fact, it was during Damasus's rule that Christianity became the official religion of Rome. Throughout his papacy, Damasus was accused of murder and adultery. Many people who lived during his rule also believed him to be immoral. He was said to participate in lavish parties, he was friends with powerful leaders of other major religions, and he personally knew all of the most important pagan cult high priests. Damasus was called the lady's ear tickler by his critics, which is unsettling to say the least. And in the year 378 AD, he was accused of cheating on his wife. Shortly after he was found innocent of adultery, everyone who accused him of the sin was cast out of the church and banished. Pope Innocent III will forever be remembered as the man who started the Albigensian Crusade. In the 13th century, there was a movement spreading across Europe that not too many people know about. It was called Catharism, and it was a kind of dualist religion that challenged the teachings of the Catholic Church. The movement began to blossom, with the followers of Catharism referring to themselves as good Christians. They were trying to take all the best parts of Christianity and dismiss the corruption, violence, and brutality that was the Catholic Church. This was not ideal for Pope Innocent III, who liked the Church just the way it was, so he began a crusade against them. On July 22, 1209, the Pope's army committed a massacre at the city of Béziers. The army killed about 20,000 people with their swords, making it one of the greatest one-sided slaughters in history. Commanders in the army were ordered to kill everyone, and they were told that God would sort out the Christians. The soldiers knew they were murdering people of their own faith, but they chose not to care. By the time the Crusaders were done, nobody in the town was left alive. Pope John XII became the ruler of the Papal States on December 16, 955 AD. He held the position until his untimely death in 964 AD. His name was Octavian before becoming Pope John, and he had direct ties to a powerful Roman family that controlled the politics and the church for at least half a century. Pope John XII was only a teenager when he took the greatest seat of power available in Rome. One of his first moves as Pope was to attack the Lombard people of Italy, who had taken several chunks of the Papal States. He wanted to reclaim land, but it didn't work out in his favor. Fearing for his life, Pope John XII reached out to King Otto I of Germany. Together they made a pact. King Otto would defend the Pope with everything he had, and in return the Pope would make Otto the Holy Roman Emperor. After being crowned, Otto became the most powerful man in Italy. Pope John soon realized he'd made a mistake. Emperor Otto was far more powerful than the young Pope could ever hope to be. John was also a notorious scumbag, and it was apparent to the people that he cared very little about the church. He was seen as vain, and he was always sleeping with people's wives. According to the legends, he was caught in bed with a man's wife and was strangled to death. Pope Clement VII began his life as a member of the Medici family and was originally named Giulio de Giuliano de' Medici. His family was once one of the most politically influential households in all of Italy. They were extremely wealthy, and they were so important that their children were welcome to become pope, even if they had no legitimate qualifications. To make things worse, Pope Clement was an illegitimate child, and he was raised by his uncle, Lorenzo the Magnificent. He went on to become the Pope in 1523 and ruled the Vatican for 11 years. Clement wasn't necessarily an evil pope. He just made a lot of really poor decisions. He didn't understand the Lutheran movement that was happening, nor did he know how to make proper alliances. Emperor Charles V had endorsed his candidacy for pope, and yet Clement allied himself with the emperor's enemy, Francis I of France. He basically spat in the face of the emperor, which later resulted in his imprisonment inside the castle of Saint-Angelo. The Pope's misguided attempt to be friends with France resulted in Rome being pillaged by the emperor. Then, when the emperor refused to pay the mercenaries, they ravaged Rome in May of 1527. The only thing Clement VII did during his rule that didn't end in a bunch of people getting killed was when he commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. Pope Boniface VIII is considered by many historians to be the least saintly pope in history. He was the head of the Catholic Church from December 1294 until his death in 1303. After the unexpected abdication of Pope Celestine V, Boniface became the Vatican's 193rd pope. The details of his rule are controversial at best. This is because Pope Boniface got into a feud with King Philip of Spain, causing negative rumors to circulate about the pope. It's difficult to say for certain which rumors were true and which were false. Boniface supposedly imprisoned the Pope before him for 10 months until Celestine keeled over and died. He also allegedly had incestuous relations with his own children. He was repeatedly adulterous and even had an issue with young boys. After he became Pope, he built statues of himself all over Rome and began taking bribes for seats in the church. He was so evil that when Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, he reserved a special place for Boniface in the 8th circle of hell. John Wycliffe was an English priest who was largely responsible for the build-up of the Protestant Reformation that would sweep across Europe. He grew up in the mid-1300s, at a time when the Holy Roman Catholic Church reigned supreme. They had already split into the Western Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church, but this only seemed to double their power. As an educated theologian and priest, John was vocal about the Church's abuses, and he challenged the hierarchy. He was even bold enough to say that the Scriptures were the supreme authority, not the Pope. He claimed the Church had strayed far from its original purpose and needed a desperate correction. The Church didn't like people saying this stuff, especially those who were getting the attention of the masses. After he died of a stroke in 1384, John was brutalized by the Church, and they condemned him as a heretic in 1415. His remains were later dug up and buried. Then his ashes were thrown into the river by angry Catholics.